Hi, everybody. I'm still kind of sick, but let's do a solution. So I have here the starter code for hash list. Let's start by implementing the get method. So we'll calculate the index using the hash function. So I'll find the hash for key, and then I'll check if it's empty. And the way to check if it's empty is to check if there's null in that location. So if there is null, we'll return null ourselves. Otherwise, we'll return the value of the object at that location. So return array index.value. Okay, so far so good. Let's implement the size method now. So for the size method, I recommended that you create a field called count. In the constructor, we'll initialize it to 0. And then inside put, we'll add 1 whenever we actually put a new thing into the map. So just updating the value of an existing key doesn't count. And when we end up handling collisions, we'll want to add 1 to the count here as well. But right now, when there's a collision, we replace the old one with the new one. So that also doesn't add any new things to the map. So this is the only place where we add something new. So here, I'll say count plus plus. Okay, so that's the end of that one. Let's do key set. Not actually a set, it's actually a list. So same approach, let's go ahead and create a field called keylist, and then we'll initialize it in the constructor. And then same thing, inside put, whenever we put in a new key, we'll go ahead and add it to keylist. So here in this case, we'd say keylist add the key, because here we're just about to store a new object. In this version, so if we're just updating an existing value, because the key already is in the table, then we don't need to add a new thing to keylist, because presumably it's already in there. Here where there's a collision and we're replacing the existing item with a new item, we would want to actually remove, I guess let's do it. So we'd actually want to remove the existing key, and then we want to add the new key. The problem with this is this runs in big O of the number of keys, which is the same thing as n for us. So this has now changed our put method from constant time to big O of n. But that problem is going to go away as soon as we resolve collisions. Okay, so that's it for part 1. Okay, let's do solution to part 2, where we'll grow our capacity whenever we reach the max load. I'm going to create a max load that I'm going to initialize to a constant. Well, actually, I'm going to override the constructor. So let's have one version of it where we take the max load as an input. Actually, let's do this. I like a version where we have the initial capacity as an input and also a max load as an input. And then we have a different version of the constructor which will run the first one with, oops, come on. With initial capacity and default max load. Okay, so I'm going to make my default max load be 60%. But this is nice because now I can have I can change these things using my constructor. All right, so what we're going to do, the general idea here is we want to detect when we're exceeding our maximum load, and when we do, we'll grow the array and then reinsert everything. So I think I'm going to do this all at the very top. So if this dot size is larger than this dot max load times the length of the array. So we're saying, so this dot max load times the length of the array is going to be the number of things that we're allowed to store into our array before we hit our max load. And this is the number of things we've actually stored. So this is a test to see if we've exceeded our maximum load. And if we have, then we'll grow array and we'll rehash values. So let's run grow array. I actually want to rewrite how this is going to happen. So let's do this. Entry array, so new array. I guess it doesn't really need its own method. All I need to do is create a new let's create a new entry object. Entry array. That's the length of the old one times a growth multiplier, and I'm going to make my growth multiplier be 2. Okay, so cool, did that. Now let's rehash all values, and I think to do that I'm going to give it the existing array and the new array. And what we'll do is we'll take things from here and insert them there. Okay, so one thing you could do would be something like this. Let's loop through all the spots in our existing array. And if the spot isn't null, that means there's an object that needs inserting. So I'm going to make a method called hash into, where I'll give it the new array, and I'll give it the thing that we want to be the thing that we want to be inserting, which is that item. We're going to rewrite this in just a second to be slightly different. Okay, great. So this is more or less like our put method. Oh, in fact, you know what? This is exactly like our put method. So I actually want to do something different. Let's do this. Let's run a version of put, except it's got the wrong parameters, because our version of put assumes like the one and only array that's the internal array for storage. But I'm going to do this. I'm going to rewrite this. So let's make this version of put private. I'm going to rename it. And then the public version of put will run put into array with this dot array, and then key and value like that. And then here I'll have an entry array. All right. So let me explain what I just did. So I'm making a private version of the put method where I can actually specify the array that I want to be putting into. And then the public version is going to put into this dot array. But what this is going to let me do is this is going to let me put into my kind of other temporary array as soon as I make one change. The one change is I also want to change our hash so that we can control what the mod is. And that's going to create a cascade of problems, but we will fix them. So here we're going to say array.length, but array might be the array that got passed in. Let's fix the other problems. Oh yeah, all right, I remember. We'll come back to that one. Oh, you know what would have been better than this, actually? Well, that's all right. Well, no, let's undo it. So what would have been better than this? Again, I'm going to overload it. I'm going to overload the hash method. So here we've got array length, but then so that I don't have to change most of my calls to hash, let's run hash with array.length. So that's creating like a default version of this method. If you program it in Python you can give parameters default values, which would have been the right way to solve this in Python, but for Java we're going to do this. Okay, so now let's resume where we left off. We were in the process of rehashing all the values, which means we're taking everything from our existing array and reinserting it into the new array. So we're looping through our existing array, we're finding wherever the objects are stored, and then we're going to run put into array, the new array, and then the key and the value. Okay. And so then what this is going to do is this is going to run our normal put method, except we're going to be adding to this array instead of the objects array. And the hash, and because we made sure that the hash function was using the length of this array, we're sure it's going to get kind of hashed into the right spot. Let me actually double check that I didn't undo that in all my undoing. Oh, I did. Okay, so this should actually be array.length. Because array now is this input array. Okay, so that looks nice. So now that we've rehashed, after rehashing the values, the last step is to say this dot array equals new array. So now we're overwriting the existing array with the new one. And I think finally for readability, I'm going to make a method out of these. Paste them there. Okay. Great. So now we're at a place where we should probably test. In fact, we probably should have tested before now. So come back in the next video and we'll do like some basic tests.